Okay, thanks very much for that. I want to kick off by starting by thanking the organizers for today's webinar, UNESCO, IMA, in particular, Dr. Mohammed for the kind invitation to attend, and especially given my scheduling conflicts. It's a real pleasure to be able to participate in today's webinar, even though I'm not physically based in Trinidad these days. I have been privileged to be engaged in protected areas design for the country over the last couple of years, and I, recognize all the folks on the panel as well, Keisha and Rahana, certainly in our work in Trinidad, doing the plan for the protected area system of Trinidad and Tobago. And I wanted to share some of those insights with you and frame conservation of marine protected areas in the country in the context of emerging global and regional conservation challenges, and then kind of examine our opportunities and capacities to address these challenges. Next slide, please. As you're all aware, in the last couple of years, we've been making some great strides in Tobago and Trinidad in identification, designation, and management of marine protected areas. From the identification of the first forest reserve in our hemisphere to the 40-year-old Bucco Reef Marine Area, Trinidad and Tobago have been able to demonstrate leadership on protected areas conservation for a long time. In the more recent past, the development of the new systems plan for protected areas for the country, for instance, identified 22 marine candidate areas for Tobago for protection. The recent designation of Northeast Tobago as a man in the biosphere reserve is another step on the road to ensuring conservation of marine systems and coastal waters in northern Tobago. But not only that conservation, but also placing sustainable livelihoods as central to the management of these areas. I wanted to take this opportunity to really congratulate everyone working in Tobago on this. This is quite an achievement, and for which everyone should be really proud of what you've been able to achieve. I think for me, taking part in the marine spatial planning for Tobago, for instance, was really interesting because we really engage with the local stakeholders. And in fact, the identification, for instance, of this extended protected area in North Tobago was really at the behest of the local stakeholders. When those of us who were part of the design team actually sat down to talk about which areas we are looking at, one of our big concerns was achievability, whether or not we would be able to actually get stakeholders and the local government to agree on the size of protected areas, because that usually is one of the biggest challenges. And one learning that I had from that process was actually the stakeholders wanted to do way more than I thought was ever possible. So that was a big learning for me, taking part in that process. Next slide, please. If we look at Trinidad historically and in common with Tobago, the marine areas which have been the focus of attention have been the offshore islands, for instance, places like Shodo Island and Soldado Rock, which historically were identified as important seabird nesting areas, and they remain so today. Recently, the new Protected Area Systems Plan, what we did was we tried to use the best available scientific knowledge together with multiple public consultations again. And for this allowed us to identify 4 open water marine areas as sites for potential designation. And these included sites, as you'll see in this, this image in the lower right-hand corner. These included sites along the Atlantic, Eastern Caribbean, and Caribbean Sea parts of the EEZ of the country. This system is really ambitious, and it would protect 1/5 of what is that approximately 76,000 square kilometer EEZ of the country. So again, really ambitious of the Trinidad and Tobago government to be able to even propose this and to start that discussion about this. The Protected Area Systems Plan also focused on areas that were important for marine historical heritage, and hence the focus on the Northwest Peninsula, Trinidad, and then areas in the east, like Galera Point, which is at the top here, and certainly we identified 8 nesting beaches for marine turtles, again, migratory species protection. And these areas, a lot of them, these were areas that the stakeholders, meaning local people who lived in local communities, identified as areas they wanted conserved. And I can't underscore how important that level of public engagement is when we talk about marine spatial planning. Next slide, please. What I want to highlight here is that despite the advances in our technology and all the work done by local scientists, and again, here I want to recognize all the hard work of the Institute of Marine Affairs, UE, UTT, as well as colleagues based here in the UK and in the US. I've grabbed a couple maps that, for instance, we used when we were looking at trying to plan these protected areas, particularly the deep sea protected areas that we proposed in the National Plan for Trinidad and Tobago. But again, what I want to focus on here is not so much what we know, but what we don't know. There are lots of fundamental gaps, despite our technology, despite the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. These gaps in our fundamental understanding and our fundamental knowledge, and here I mean simply identifying what is in the marine system. These remain some of the key weaknesses in our ability to manage marine systems and hence to plan for them. On this slide, I've identified just a handful of challenges for those of us that want to plan. In my case, planning protected areas, but certainly for spatial planners wanting to deal with the gamut of all different kinds of human interactions, and certainly to develop spaces for the blue economy, the challenges here are very complex. Like I say, I've just identified a handful here. Climate change and the potential impact of storm intensity on nearshore marine systems, coral bleaching. We've seen lionfish as the quintessential invasive species, but there are many others in the marine system. We've got real challenges with overharvesting of keystone species. Many of them, we tend to not think of marine species as being becoming endangered or critically endangered, but there are many of them that are in trouble today. We've seen diseases like stony coral tissue loss really taken off in the Northern Caribbean, and certainly that should be an area of concern for us. We've seen large-scale ecological perturbations like sargassum, and then of course really complex issues like nearshore pollution affecting conservation of these areas. And certainly if we're looking at the blue economy, the issue of ship traffic and the potential impact of ship traffic on cetaceans is a big issue for us. I haven't here highlighted the challenges posed by the historically very active energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago, nor have I included issues that are emerging in other archipelagic states, such as exploitation of seabed minerals. The point that I want to make here is that there's a lot of complexity in terms of the challenges that face those of us who want to help develop sustainable livelihoods in the marine environment for our country. These are indeed what conservation scientists like to call wicked problems, because they epitomize problems that are complex, multifaceted, and don't have a single optimal solution. Next slide, please. So how do we go forward? The important challenge for us is to know how to undertake our marine spatial planning in a way that explicitly acknowledges the challenges and opportunities for the people and businesses whose livelihoods depend on these systems. From my perspective, there are at least 5 key elements to addressing these challenges. Firstly, we have to develop a systematic way to fill our data gaps. There are some great studies being undertaken, for instance, those being done by ERIC based in Tobago on indicator species like groupers and sharks. But going forward, we need to build on these and move beyond the species list and presence absence data towards identification of long-term trends in abundance and distribution of key species and systems, as well as their response to environmental change. Here, developing predictive modeling for the response of these indicator species and systems is key. The second decision-making item for this is trying to engage all the stakeholders in a way that's really collaborative. Only then can we really expect to make progress on these wicked problems. Thus, issues like coastal pollution, ship traffic, and overharvesting, these will be by definition wicked problems that need to have stakeholder involvement. The key here is that we have to build resiliency in coastal systems, if we want to address larger issues like climate change that are beyond the scope of us as small countries. The other issue that I have here is sustainable financing. And here I mean financing for managing these protected areas. And this is really key, figuring out how to finance research, public education, law enforcement in these protected areas will require some creative thinking. Again, creative thinking, like thinking about the blue economy discussed in this webinar, will be key. In the context of COVID, our traditional models are fragile. So for those of us that are focused on using ecotourism as a means of sustainable livelihoods in these coastal systems, we need to have a rethink. Importantly, adopting a whole ecosystem approach has to be at the center of management of these marine areas. And I want to end by saying, in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, perhaps the most difficult thing in my experience, and I've, spent the last 30 years working in the Caribbean, in Trinidad in particular, enacting and enforcing enabling legislation to allow us to put our plans for spatial management of marine systems has been, a big challenge for us. So I think going forward, having a strategy to get that enabling framework in place and doing that in a way that allows us to meet our international obligations, whether these obligations are our commitments under the Convention on Biological Diversity or commitments under other international treaties that deal with migratory species or protection of marine heritage. The enacting of enabling legislation that enables all the stakeholders to participate fully in the process. These are the key elements that I see going forward. So those are the key areas that I wanted to touch on today, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.